Hello, humans. Most people do not go broke because of one huge cinematic mistake. They go broke the boring way, repeatedly, quietly, through habits so normal they barely even register as danger. If somebody bought a tiger, a yacht, or clown cryptocurrency, at least the disaster would have style. But real damage is less entertaining. It is the daily drip, the soft leak. The pattern of letting money leave faster than your future can survive. A little emotional spending, a little "I deserve this," a little lifestyle inflation every time income goes up. That is how people stay broke for years while feeling like nothing reckless is ever happening. Because these habits do not feel self-destructive in the moment. They feel completely and totally normal. And normal is exactly what makes them dangerous. One reason these habits are so hard to spot is that broke behavior often looks socially normal. That is the trap. It does not arrive dressed like failure. It arrives dressed like everyday life. Everyone orders food when tired. Everyone treats themselves sometimes. Everyone puts something on a card and says they will deal with it later. Everyone upgrades a little when income goes up. Everyone ignores the spreadsheet when the spreadsheet starts feeling judgmental. That is what makes this so sneaky. A lot of the habits that keep people broke are not shocking or especially stupid in isolation. They are common, socially approved. They blend into culture so well that people mistake repetition for harmlessness. But normal is not the same as sustainable. The fact that everybody does it does not mean it is safe. It just means the damage has good PR. Stop being normal. The first habit is treating leftover money like the budget. A fantastic system if your goal is to let randomness run your financial life like a drunk intern. Many people don't tell their money where to go before the month starts. They earn, spend, react, and look at whatever survives at the end like a mysterious weather event. That's not a budget. That's financial gambling in casual clothes. When whatever remains becomes your plan, you've handed control to impulse and convenience. Real financial stability doesn't begin with genius. It begins with not forcing your future to live off the crumbs of your unplanned present. Leftover money is not a strategy. It's just what happens when the strategy never showed up. The second habit is confusing small comfort with harmless spending, which is where money starts dying in tiny, cozy installments. Because almost nobody ruins their finances with one giant dramatic purchase. They ruin them with repeated little relief. Food delivery because the day was long. A treat because life is hard. A subscription because it's only a few dollars. A taxi because you're tired. A random convenience purchase because your brain has mistaken spending for emotional first aid. None of this feels serious in the moment, and that's why it's so effective. Small comfort spending hides inside phrases like, "it's not that much," and "I deserve this," until the month ends and your account balance looks like it got mugged by soft decisions. The issue isn't that pleasures are evil, it's that repeated emotional spending becomes a system. And once comfort becomes a reflex expense, your money starts leaking through 1,000 tiny mood-based exits. The third habit is never looking closely at the numbers, one of the most popular financial traditions on earth, right after denial. A lot of people don't know where the money goes or how much damage one repeated pattern is doing. They just have a general emotional impression that money disappears quickly and reality feels rude. That's not awareness. That's being financially blind with a debit card. And blindness is expensive. Because what you do not measure becomes mythology. Suddenly, spending feels random when it's actually repetitive. You keep refusing to inspect it because numbers might hurt your feelings. But the numbers were real before you looked at them. Avoiding them doesn't protect you. It just lets the damage keep paying rent inside your life. The fourth habit is building a lifestyle before building stability, which is how people end up decorating financial fragility like it is success. This usually starts innocently. Better apartment, better clothes, better phone, better restaurants. Little upgrades everywhere because now you make a bit more and you are a human being, not a monastery chair. But the problem is not wanting nicer things. It is building the visible version of a stable life before building the invisible structure that supports it. No real buffer, no margin, no breathing room, just a more expensive normal life balanced on the same weak financial legs as before. That is why so many people look fine right up until one medium-sized inconvenience walks in. Lifestyle is the fun part, stability is the boring part. And the boring part is the one that stops your future from turning into a series of expensive surprises and deeply offended card balances. The fifth habit is letting every raise disappear into lifestyle creep, which is one of the smoothest ways to stay financially stuck while still telling yourself you are doing better. Income goes up, which should be good news, but somehow the extra money immediately gets converted into a more expensive version of normal. Better food, nicer trips, upgraded routines, and suddenly the financial gain has been quietly digested by a new standard of everyday life. That is the trick with lifestyle creep. It does not feel reckless, it feels earned, it feels adult. The issue is when every increase in income gets consumed before it has a chance to strengthen your actual position. More money should not only buy nicer habits, it should buy more stability, more margin, and more resilience. Otherwise, you are not really getting richer. You are just becoming a higher maintenance version of the same financial vulnerability. The sixth habit is using future money to comfort present stress, where debt starts dressing up like emotional support. Credit cards, installment plans, buy now, pay later, it all runs on the same fantasy: that your future self will be richer, calmer, and somehow thrilled to clean up the mess you're making because this week felt annoying. And to be fair, present stress is persuasive. When life is exhausting, borrowing against tomorrow can feel like an act of mercy toward your fried nervous system. But that mercy comes with interest, fees, and a bill that arrives long after the emotional reason for the purchase has evaporated. This habit doesn't remove pressure, it just exports it forward to a version of yourself who's already busy surviving fresh nonsense. Future money isn't free money, it's just current desperation wearing a payment plan. The seventh habit is treating financial organization like something for later, which is one of the quietest ways to stay trapped in money chaos for years. People postpone the boring structure stuff constantly. Budget later, track spending later, and sort the accounts later. Build the emergency fund later, set up automatic transfers later, figure out the debt properly later. And later becomes this magical fantasy where you suddenly turn into the kind of person who color codes their finances with priest-like serenity. Very moving story, tragically fake. Financial organization almost never begins when life gets easy enough to invite it in. It begins when you force structure into the mess before you feel ready. That is the point. Waiting to organize your money until it feels organized is like waiting to mop the floor until the floor develops initiative. The longer you delay systems, the longer you stay financially exposed to the exact same patterns, making your life harder than it needs to be. What makes all of these habits especially dangerous is that almost none of them feel self-destructive in the moment. That's the real scam. They feel practical, comfortable, understandable, even responsible in a weird, twisted way. You're not throwing money off a bridge like a villain. You're ordering convenience because you're tired, avoiding the spreadsheet because you're stressed, upgrading your lifestyle because you worked hard, using future money because the present feels sharp and unpleasant, postponing financial organization because the month is already chaotic enough. That's why people stay stuck. The damage isn't theatrical enough to trigger panic. It arrives as ordinary behavior with good excuses and excellent social camouflage. And because each choice feels small and individually survivable, the bigger pattern stays invisible. Until you zoom out and realize your finances have been quietly mugged by normality. That is also why being broke often feels busy instead of reckless. A lot of people are not wandering around setting their money on fire with jazz hands and bad decisions. They are exhausted. They are behind. They are reacting. They are patching one hole while two more appear. They are living in short-term mode because the system around them and the habits inside them keep forcing everything into the present tense. Pay this now. Fix this now. Comfort this feeling now. Survive this week now. And once your financial life becomes a chain of urgent little reactions, long-term thinking starts to feel like a luxury item for people whose nervous systems still have battery left. That is why some broke patterns do not look wild from the inside. They look like maintenance, like survival. Because stress turns strategy into a tomorrow problem, and tomorrow is already on fire. Real damage comes from repetition, not drama. People hate that because it's uncinematic. It's not one giant mistake that ruins everything while orchestral music swells and the camera zooms into your regret. It's the same soft pattern repeated 50 times. The same food delivery logic, the same "I'll deal with it later," the same invisible subscription drift, the same refusal to look closely. One time barely matters, 10 times starts to sting. 100 times quietly eats years of progress while you tell yourself nothing huge is going wrong. That's how financial erosion works. Quietly, through habits that never feel big enough to confront. Humans love catastrophe in theory, but what actually wrecks them is repetition wearing comfortable shoes. That is why most people do not need some genius financial master plan built by a spreadsheet warlock with 12 monitors and a superiority complex. They need friction against their own stupid patterns. That is the real upgrade, not more theory. Not a podcast episode called Wealth Alignment for Savage Minds. Not a second budgeting app that looks like a Scandinavian spaceship. Just simple barriers between you and the habits that keep draining your future. Automatic transfers, so the money leaves before you can romance yourself into spending it. A spending cap on categories where your impulses like to do parkour. One boring weekly money check-in so the numbers cannot live in the shadows like little financial goblins. A tiny amount of structure that makes the easiest bad decision slightly less easy. Because most people are not being ruined by lack of knowledge. They are being slowly mugged by familiar behaviors that keep winning by default. Getting better with money is also usually less about restriction and more about awareness. Which is annoying because awareness is not sexy and cannot be sold with dramatic background music. People love the fantasy that financial improvement comes from some heroic new identity, where they suddenly become disciplined, minimalist, optimized, and spiritually immune to convenience spending. But for most people, progress begins somewhere much more boring. Seeing the pattern, naming the trigger, knowing where the money actually leaks. Understanding what kind of bad day turns into what kind of stupid expense. Awareness does not mean guilt. It means you stop being surprised by the same behavior every month like a Victorian woman finding ghosts in her curtains. Once you can actually see the pattern, you can interrupt it. And that is a lot more powerful than endlessly declaring that this month will be different while doing exactly the same thing with more emotional narration. So, here's the verdict. People stay broke quietly because the habits that keep them there feel normal, small, understandable, and easy to excuse in the moment. It is rarely one giant financial disaster with cinematic villain energy. More often, it is repeated softness, repeated avoidance, repeated comfort spending, repeated improvisation, repeated use of future money to calm present stress, repeated refusal to build boring structure before life gets dramatic again. That is why these habits are so dangerous. They do not look like destruction, they look like everyday life. And everyday life is where the future gets quietly eaten. The good news is that the fix is usually less dramatic than the problem. You do not need to become a money genius. You need to stop letting normal-looking patterns drain your stability 1 month at a time. Subscribe. I am literally doing budget realism with postmortem discipline.